We're in Burlington, Vermont on July 5th, 1994, talking with Murray Bookchin. I'd like to begin with a question about the left, the current left, and ask if you believe that the left has died.
Well, everybody seems to be asking that question, at least if I'm to judge by so-called leftist periodicals. Dissent had a whole debate on the future of socialism, which identifies with the left. I've seen discussions about the future of the left, whether it exists or not, or whether the word socialism, for example, should be dropped in Socialist Review, which comes out of San Francisco. Similar debates have occurred in the Village Voice, some of which have been very, very strident indeed. And of course, I think I mentioned Dissent magazine, which has also raised this issue. The first thing that amazes me to begin with is that the left has folded up in the eyes of many so-called leftists the moment the Berlin Wall fell, and the moment they started tearing down statues of Stalin and the secret police chief Dzerzhinsky in Moscow, and Yeltsin started to emerge talking about the end of socialism, or indeed the introduction of capitalism into Russia. And it appalls me that so many people who call themselves socialists or leftists, and I would even include a number of anarchists, really depended for their leftism on the existence of the so-called second world of socialists, or the so-called existing socialisms, as though Russia under Stalin was ever even remotely a socialist country simply because it nationalized property and simply because it claimed the heritage of the October Revolution of 1917, a heritage which Stalin systematically abandoned during the late 1930s and into the 1940s up to his death in 1953. I never, at the moment I became socially conscious in any insightful way, regarded Stalin or the Soviet Union as socialist. The most significant arguments we had in the late 1930s and into the 1940s, early 1940s, was whether or not the Soviet Union, as it was called, which is neither Soviet nor a union, or was neither Soviet nor a union, by which I mean a council, Soviet and Union, which was held together by any degree of agreement other than the secret police and the concentration camps, could in any sense of the word even be called the Soviet Union. It was a totalitarian despotism. And the arguments we had were whether or not, at best, whether the Soviet Union under Stalin was a degenerated, decayed, whatever you like, worker state, which I rarely believed, and whether or not it was even socialist. Or not even socialist, but what form of society was it other than socialist or capitalist? Because in the 1940s, one of the biggest debates that existed on the anti-Stalinist left was whether or not Russia was a bureaucratic collectivist society, which meant an entirely non-socialist, non-capitalist society in which bureaucrats collectively ran everything for their own benefit at the expense of the masses, or whether or not the so-called Soviet Union under Stalin was a red fascist country, and red only for coloration. Remember that Hitler's flag was also red, with the swastika in the middle. Those were the debates that I was familiar with. I'm astonished thus to find in the current issue of Dissent magazine a debate going on called The Crimes of Communism. What did you know and when did you know it? And then it's headed off by Eugene D. Genovese and followed by replies by old-time Stalinists who are now reconstructed, like Mitchell Cohn, Eric Foner, Alice Kessler-Hands, and a few others. Who wants to go into this? It's notable who they pick, Dissent picks, to ask When did you discover the crimes of what? Communism? Was Russia communist to begin with? Are they playing up again to the right-wing prejudice that communism has failed as an ideal? One that long precedes Stalin, one that long precedes Lenin, one that even long precedes Karl Marx. I would never use the word communism with reference to Russia, Stalinist Russia or Leninist Russia, despite Lenin's attempt to make Russia into a kind of dynamic force for starting a revolution in Europe. That was Lenin's intention in making the Russian Revolution, not to establish communism or socialism in one country. And everybody conveniently forgets that, despite Lenin's many errors and many failures. So I'm annoyed by one, the very title, The Crimes of Communism. Communism has never committed crimes in Russia because it never existed in Russia. There was a thing called the Communist Party, run by a totalitarian despot called Stalin. And there was a thing called National Socialism, run by another despot called Adolf Hitler. Does that mean the crimes of socialism also? And so these are annoying. This kind of question, which dissent typically asks, so much is part of the social democratic milieu that exists on the so-called fading left of today. And why do they ask it of people who are obviously going to answer, in most cases, that they discovered all of this when Khrushchev spoke about the crimes of Stalin? Didn't Genovese know about the crimes of Stalin in the 1930s when he killed the whole Bolshevik Central Committee? And when millions of people were being sent to the gulags, the concentration camps? And didn't Mitchell Cohn and Erich Foner and all the others know about the crimes of Stalin? Not only in 1953, but in 1938 when they executed Nikolai Bukharin and all the leading Bolsheviks at that time? When they dropped the International as the anthem of Russia, a mere facade anyway to begin with under Stalin, and replaced it with a Mother Russia, patriotic, totally chauvinistic and nationalistic anthem. They had to wait till 1953 or 1956 to find out what the crimes of, quotes, communism, close quote, are. And that annoys, because there are a lot of people who knew what these crimes were in the 1930s. They were left socialists, Young People's Socialist League. They were Trotskyists, whatever one may think of Trotsky. He pointed out the key crimes that were being committed at that time, if not the only ones. There were many others who broke with Trotsky and still remaining on the left and designating themselves as leftists, or if you like, as communists with a small c, or socialists, knew the crimes of Stalin and knew that there wasn't anything called socialism or communism at that point in Russia. So dissent always selects its own little bouquet of inner circle editorial writers and contributors in which to ask questions that often receive the narrowest and most tendentious replies. Now, I mention that not because I have any special quarrel with dissent. I have a quarrel with practically all the so-called left periodicals that exist today, including many self-styled anarchist periodicals. That isn't the point. The point that I'm trying to raise is the way in which the issues are being posed. Is the left dead today? We find that all over the place, as I said, in all kinds of periodicals, and everybody's kind of celebrating that they're no longer on the left. Many of them being, of course, former New Leftists who were Maoists in the 1960s, whom we had to fight. We on the left libertarian wing of socialism had to fight. They were in the way. And now that they were in the way then, they're in the way now. They have a persistent habit of being in the way. Being Maoists in the 60s and now being reformist social democrats, or even worse, right-wingers, such as Horowitz in the 90s. So I submit to you, there is a left. Unfortunately, too many people who were formerly on the left, I do not believe, in my view, speak for the left. And I'm outraged by that. And one of the main reasons why there has to be a left, even if people are trying to disband it, who are formerly on the left and have found new careers, principally as academics, secondly as dentists, thirdly as corporate heads, fourthly as candidates for governorship in California. I think of good old Tom Hayden, and other riffraff who were in our way in the 60s when we tried to develop an independent libertarian left in Students for a Democratic Society, or in the Civil Rights Movement, or in all the new social movements that we thought were emerging at that time, now come out and tell us that the left essentially is gone, and that they are no longer on the left. They are now professors, you understand. The very professors playing the same role that they objected to when they were students in the 60s. This, if you forgive my anger, is very disquieting to me. As long as there is a right, and there is a right, and it calls itself a right, it is the Christian right, it is the fascist right, it is the skinhead right, it is the extremely conservative right, and the so-called liberal right, which goes under the name of New Democrats, there is a place historically for the left. And the point is that the abdication of many people from their left-wing background and their understanding of what the left ever was is, in my opinion, a surrender that is unwarranted, and more than ever today raises the question of the need to create a left, to understand what the left was, what it should be, what it is today, and where it reposes around what issues.
You've been using the term left, and I think a lot of people are unclear even about the term left. What do you mean by a left? And you ended by discussing leading into the origin, history, the present, and future of the left. Could you cover those questions?
The word left itself, la gauche, comes out of the French Revolution of 1789 to 1794. And the left consisted of the most radical deputies in the National Assembly, roughly around the 1890s, early 1890s, before the convention appeared, and also in the Revolutionary Convention itself. The word left consisted of those radical deputies who were on the left side of the tribune when somebody addressed the National Assembly or the convention. And while that was an ever-shifting left, some moving to the center, just as the center moved toward the right, as the revolution became more and more radical, nonetheless, the image of the most radical section of the French Revolution was generally seen to be on the left side and in the upper benches, what was called the mountain, on the left side of the speaker's tribune. And it entered into history throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century as the left. Now, what does the left really mean? And one must, of course, recognize that the left has a history. It evolved out of a form of extreme left-wing liberalism and extreme radical democracy, increasingly toward an ever more sophisticated, ever more knowledgeable, ever more socially conscious, and significantly ever more not only politically conscious but economically conscious type of movement. And this is important to stress. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that if one looks at the history of the left, one finds that whereas in the French Revolution the main concerns that the left voiced were popular control. And I would not place the Jacobins here, strangely enough, on the left. I would place the much more radical